People think questions are harmless. They're not. A question already tells you where someone is headed. Sometimes it tells you where they've already decided not to go.
Έτσι μου είχε πει μια φορά ο Άγιος Παΐσιος μου. Και βάζουνε λέει αυτό το. Βάλε εσύ λέει το στόχο σου ψηλά. Και πού πάει. Γιατί άμα βάλεις σαν στόχο τη μετριότητα εκεί θα πας στον πάτο. Διότι θα κάνεις συμβιβασμούς. Ενώ άμα βάλεις τον πύχη ψηλά εκεί δύσκολα κάνεις συμβιβασμούς και θα πιάσεις τη βάση.
It sounds humble if you don't listen closely. It sounds realistic, almost responsible. But it's not an innocent question, because you don't ask that when you want to grow. You ask that when you want a limit you don't have to cross. And Saint Paisios knew it. That's why he didn't answer them directly. Not because he didn't care. Not because he wanted to be mysterious. He didn't answer because answering would have confirmed the wrong direction. Instead, he reframed it. He said, they reminded him of students. Not bad students, not lazy ones, capable ones, the kind who could do far more than they're doing, the dangerous kind, students who walk into class and don't ask how much they can learn. They ask what grade they need to pass. And the moment they ask that, something subtle happens. The goal shrinks. The effort reorganizes. The ceiling lowers, not because someone forced it down, because they chose a smaller horizon. That's the part people miss. Low goals aren't usually chosen out of weakness. They're chosen out of relief. Relief from pressure. Relief from responsibility. Relief from finding out what you're actually capable of. Because aiming higher means you lose excuses. It means you can't hide behind good enough. And once you've framed life around minimums, everything else adjusts. Your discipline, your honesty, your tolerance for discomfort. You don't collapse. You don't fail dramatically. You just quietly rearrange your standards. Saint Paisios refused to answer the question because once you give someone a minimum, they stop asking better questions. And that's the real danger. Not that they'll fail, but that they'll stop aiming altogether and call it wisdom. Here's what happens after you accept a low goal. Nothing dramatic. That's why it works. When your target is small, your life turns into a negotiation table. Every day, every decision. Should I push today? Maybe tomorrow. Should I hold the line here? It's not that serious. Should I demand more of myself? Who says I need to? And every answer sounds reasonable. That's the danger. Low goals don't remove effort. They spread it thin. They make everything optional. High goals are brutal in one way. They don't let you argue. You already know what the standard is. Low goals invite debate. And debate is where discipline goes to die. This is what Saint Paisios saw immediately. People thought they were being careful. He saw that they were bargaining. Because once the question becomes, how little, your conscience stops being a guide and starts being a lawyer. It learns how to defend almost anything. You skip today? Recovery is important. You compromise that value? Context matters. You stopped early? Balance. And none of these are lies. That's the problem. They're half-truths that always lean in the same direction. Downward. This is how people lose structure without noticing. They don't wake up and abandon their principles. They reinterpret them. Again. And again. And again. Till the version of themselves they once respected feels extreme. That's when something else happens. They stop trusting their own standards. Because standards that bend too often stop feeling real. So they replace them with rules that feel safer, more flexible, less demanding. And suddenly, life feels easier, calmer, but flatter. Saint Paisios wasn't warning people about effort. He was warning them about identity drift, about what happens when compromise becomes routine. Because once you get used to negotiating everything, you start negotiating who you are. And that's not a conversation you ever win. You just keep adjusting the definition until it fits whatever you did last. That's why aiming low feels peaceful at first. It removes friction. But friction is where shape comes from. Without it, things don't break. They blur. And blurred lives don't look tragic from the outside. They look normal. That's what makes this hard to notice. Nobody stops you. Nobody warns you. Because from the outside, you're doing fine. It's only later that people realize they spent years defending a life that never asked much of them. And by then, the habit is strong, stronger than motivation. People think the cost of aiming low is failure. It isn't. Failure is loud. Failure hurts. Failure forces change. Aiming low does none of that. It just slowly erodes things. You don't crash. You don't burn out. You keep going. That's why it's dangerous. When you aim low long enough, effort stops feeling meaningful. You still work, but there's no tension in it anymore. No stretch, no edge. Intention is uncomfortable, yes, but it's also how you find out where you are. Without it, days start blending together. You repeat routines without questioning them. You explain your choices better than you examine them. That's when people start saying things like, "I'm just being realistic now." But realism, in this case, is just memory loss. You forget what it felt like to want more. Not more money, more depth, more responsibility, more weight. Saint Paisios understood something most people only realize late. Even if you fail at a high aim, your life organizes itself upward. Your habits sharpen. Your priorities clarify. Your time gains structure. Failure still builds something. But low aims don't even do that. They don't give you a direction to miss. They just give you a place to settle. And settling feels good for a while. You feel calm. You feel reasonable. You feel like you finally stopped fighting yourself. But what you really stopped doing was demanding anything. This is where people get confused. They think peace comes from reducing expectations. It doesn't. It comes from alignment. And alignment requires tension. Without tension, people don't become peaceful. They become numb. That numbness doesn't announce itself. It hides behind comfort, behind routines that don't challenge anything, behind explanations that sound mature. And because nothing is technically wrong, they assume this is just what adulthood feels like. But something is missing. They feel it at night, in quiet moments, when distractions fade, a sense that they're capable of more, and chose not to find out. That's the real cost. Not regret over mistakes, regret over unopened doors. And here's the part people avoid. Once you've organized your life around minimums, change feels like betrayal of your routines, of your explanations, of the identity you built to survive comfortably. Instead of questioning the aim, people question the idea of aiming at all. They call ambition unhealthy. They call standards toxic. They call tension unnecessary. But what they're really defending is the life they've already accepted. And that's a hard thing to admit without anger. Which is why people resist this idea so strongly. Because if aiming low has a cost, then just enough was never neutral. It was expensive. This is why Saint Paisios refused to answer the question, not because he wanted people to struggle more, not because he believed difficulty was holy by itself. He refused because the question itself was already doing damage. Once someone gets a minimum, they stop listening, they stop searching, they stop stretching, they stop asking better questions. A number feels final. A line feels safe. And once you feel safe, growth starts to feel unnecessary. That's the quiet part people miss. The most dangerous thing about just enough is that it ends the conversation. It tells you, this is sufficient. This is acceptable. This is where you can stop. Saint Paisios wasn't interested in people who passed. He was interested in people who became. And becoming doesn't begin with, how little can I do? It begins with, how much responsibility am I willing to carry? That question doesn't feel gentle. It doesn't protect comfort. It doesn't come with guarantees, but it keeps the direction open, because the moment you stop aiming for the minimum, something changes. You stop negotiating every step. You stop asking permission. You stop needing constant justification. Life becomes harder in one way, but clearer in another. And clarity does something comfort never does. It gives weight to your actions. That's what Saint Paisios was protecting. Not effort, not suffering, direction. Because a person with direction can endure discomfort. A person without it will trade anything to avoid it. This is why people react so strongly to this story, because it doesn't accuse behavior. It accuses framing. It suggests that many lives aren't limited by circumstance, but by the questions they chose to ask. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Every time you're about to ask, what's the minimum? You'll hear the real question underneath. Who am I becoming if I stop here? That's not a comfortable question, but it's an honest one. And honesty, unlike comfort, doesn't shrink over time. It either grows or it demands an answer later. And later is always more expensive.